up until recently, been running mobile engineering at Twitter, now running product development on the consumer side. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit today about scaling mobile development at Twitter. I had to check a couple times which slide deck. These slides are all a lot of similar war stories that we've been hearing from LinkedIn and from Facebook. So yeah, pretty fun. So I thought I'd just start off by telling you a little bit about what we are doing in mobile at Twitter. So the first question might be like, what does that look like? Like, why do you have what's up with the scaling of mobile development? So just to talk a little bit about the kinds of things, there's sort of like three big buckets I'm going to talk about relative to. One is feature development. So this is things that are happening. Like recently, we did a deal with Comcast where from inside of the Twitter app, you can change the channel set to record a show. In this case, this is a NBC blacklist program that you can, from inside of a tweet, you can change the channel. So this has got back-end code and code throughout the stack, but also there's changes in the mobile client for something like this. And then features, products like Twitter Alerts, which is something that is a feature we did that allows customers or users like FEMA to basically use the mobile client, UX in the mobile client, to be able to send out alerts to anybody who's following them, and they show up specially in the UX on the Twitter client. So this is something, again, it's all throughout the stack, but also special UX and special functionality inside of the mobile apps. So separate from features that are kind of more general like that, there's also features that are very, very mobile specific. So an example of that would be photo filters, which is GPU accelerated filters for doing kind of all the standard color transformations, but then also things like tone mapping and other image-based effects. So obviously, this is something that a bunch of mobile development going into this. And then there's things that we're doing around the core of the product. So changes to the core timeline, home timeline of the product. So this is a feature we recently put out, which users were so excited that we changed the blue line in conversations. So messing with just the time order of tweets themselves and iterating on the core product. So again, this is something that moves throughout all of Twitter, throughout the back-end stack, the web, but then also heavily changing and iterating on the mobile client. So the sort of third bucket of things that we do are things like that are platform related. So we recently did a bunch of updates to our cards platform. So there's app deep linking that allows you from inside of a tweet to launch off into other apps. So this resulted in a bunch of changes and a bunch of development from inside the mobile teams. And this kind of development across the whole company is only accelerating inside of Twitter over the past year, really. So before I go forward into talking about kind of like a bunch of the fun things we've done, some of the missteps we've done, I wanted to take a brief step back and talk about the history of engineering at Twitter, just to set the context that mobile sits inside of. So it's no secret that over the history of Twitter, especially in our infancy, we had some stability challenges. And a lot of the reason for that was that we were built on a monolithic Rails stack. So we were probably the largest Rails stack user insaneness. We called it internally the monorail. And so about 2 years ago, we realized that to be able to get more stable and to be able to get the development velocity we wanted, we were going to need to decompose that into pieces. And so rather than stick with Ruby, we moved to JVM-based system and a bunch of Java, but then a bunch of Scala to get great horizontal scale and have the functional programming allow things to be a lot more decoupled. There's been a bunch of talks about this, so I won't belabor this, but it's interesting just for the sort of mindset shift of a lot of the engineers at Twitter, thinking about how to break down what they're doing into different services. So we have this massive service-oriented architecture. So this is a slide pulled out of some previous talks given by Twitter folks, talking about all the kind of different pieces. So that really changed the way that engineers and people think inside Twitter about how to create software into building, either standing up new services or augmenting existing services and having them all talk to each other. And that was a pretty big shift, but again, like I said, something that happened a couple years ago for us. But just over the past year alone, we have seen our engineering staff double inside Twitter. So that also is something that is influenced the way that, that mobile has changed. So moving on to a little bit of the history of mobile at Twitter and how some of the challenges we've had with scaling mobile development. So set the Wayback Machine to maybe 2 years ago or so. Mobile at Twitter really started out kind of off in the corner with a couple folks who were basically able to pretty much do kind of whatever they wanted. And every once in a while, our back-end folks would be like, whoa, we're having some crazy capacity stuff. Is it denial of service? What could be happening? And no, that was just we released a mobile app and totally changed QPS around a particular endpoint. So really fun time to be doing mobile development at Twitter because kind of just doing more or less whatever seems interesting. So that was pretty cool. But the thing that we realized as a company, and it's something that was sort of the thread through the morning talks, is as we saw more and more usage happening from our user base on mobile, more and more the company realizing that they wanted in on what was happening in mobile. And so the thing that ended up happening is our mobile team getting essentially inundated from everybody in the company coming in and saying like, hey, we got this cool thing we're doing on the web, or I have this cool new API, or this cool new service, this cool new product feature. Can we get on your backlog? And pretty soon that backlog got longer and longer and longer. Prioritization gets really tough, and not a very scalable way to do development, especially for a really compact group of people. So this was really stressful and really difficult to figure out what we should do. And what we came to was, OK, cool, we will loan mobile experts out to all these different feature teams. So we called them V teams, basically getting more full stack, more verticalized on the teams. So rather than having external teams who don't have mobile context or maybe are not mobile experts, we're like, cool, we got you covered. We will loan you a mobile expert. So sounded awesome, had some initially sounded awesome, had some pretty reasonable early wins, but the things that were less obvious that became super obvious over time are really not a lot of ownership for those teams over those mobile engineers. Even though we're putting these experts out into the teams, the managers who are managing the product managers and the designers really not able to take full advantage of them because these folks, if they were at a party and it's like, cool, what do you do at Twitter? Instead of saying like, oh, I work on this badass events experience, they would say, oh, I'm a mobile programmer. And what we realized we really wanted was people to be like, hey, I live and breathe this product feature, and I happen to be the mobile engineer on that. So the problem is really this problem of ownership, where teams didn't really feel like they had full ownership. And also, they might that loaner guy and gal, they may come back and go on to another team later, so they didn't really feel like they had control of their own destiny. And it wasn't the most fun for the engineers, where they're like, when do I get to come back? Like, and what if I am not totally excited about this particular feature? So what we then eventually evolved to, the model that's close to what we have now, is basically full stack teams, where people are, we're valuing the concept of a team, the unit of a team, and we have our engineers, whether they be mobile engineers or back-end engineers, Scala engineers, are all working together on a permanent basis on a team. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the challenges that it took us to get to that point. But the first of which I'd like to talk about is basically culture challenges. So as we went through this process of transitioning through different models of mobile development, we realized like one of our first big cultural challenges is that everybody has one of these in their pocket, but not so many people have one of these in their pocket. And this is something Jocelyn talked a little bit about. So this is whether you want to call it a typical phone or a low-end phone, this is what we realized a lot of our users have. And even if not that, an increasingly huge number of our users have at least this, which is a Motorola phone that's a little more atypical, maybe a little more high-end, but not everybody has that phone. So like one of our first challenges was getting people inside the company to understand this kind of a graph, courtesy of Google, where we're seeing a huge rise in Android use. I'm sure this resonates with you guys in the audience, but figuring out how to get the company educated around the fact that mobile did not necessarily just mean iPhone. And so ways that we did that, things that we thought about, is when we would think about doing internal presentations and showing product presentations and designs, we would start putting Android designs first. So like rather than just showing all the designs on iPhone, we'd push the teams to lead with Android. The other thing we did was we started handing out a lot of these. A lot. So basically, I think Jan's in the audience. Jan started to become the present giver inside of Twitter for getting people a lot of these phones. And really more recently starting to handle a lot of these. This is actually my phone. It is gingerbread, like Jocelyn talked about. This particular phone has a 2G SIM card in it. It's super sweet. It's awesome. It's like the most fun. And like it's pretty shocking, as I think probably as Jocelyn alluded to, it's pretty shocking to use your app on a phone like this the first time you use it, and you go like, wow, like awesome, 5 minutes for a photo upload. Yes, this is like super not great. And there's not a lot of pixels on these. It's like when you carry your 5S and you're like, I waited in line, or I got my TaskRabbit, or however you did it, and then you go back to this and you're like, dude, that's a different mind shift mentality. So getting that culture to shift so that people would start thinking about that. And really, another big part is really thinking about the fact that, again, like some of the morning speakers talked about, this software that you're sending out, it's forever. Like, we hope that everybody will adopt the newest, best, latest version of the software, but this particular cut of binary that we're putting out there, that could be out for a long time, especially on the long tail of devices. So thinking about how the ramifications of putting out shipped software into the wild, that was a huge culture shift for a lot of the engineers that had been thinking inside of the web space. And it's not just that there's a culture shift that has to happen for the bulk of the engineers and product managers and designers at Twitter. It's also, we realized that as we were hiring more mobile engineers, that we needed to get a culture shift the other direction too. And so in particular, one thing is, as I talked about, we had, started out and we had a very small group of mobile engineers, and even as we were hiring mobile engineers at the company, a lot of them were not used to working in a team environment, or working in very small team environments. So as we realized that as we were scaling up our mobile capabilities, we needed to think about how to have mobile engineers coming into the company who maybe had done like 2 indie mobile apps by themselves in their garage. Like, what was it going to be like to work inside of bigger teams and a bigger piece of software? Another big culture shift is that we still feel the effects of somewhat, is the switch from the grand reveal of like, I'm going to work on the app, I'm going to like do it for like 6 months, I'm going to make it awesome and perfect, and I'll reveal it to the universe. And realizing, again, taking a page out of something that Jocelyn talked about, where small changes, it's hard to understand the ramifications, especially in as many of your apps, like our app, have a big network effect. Thinking about how to use experimentation to drive your innovation process and use data in your design, that's something that was a shift that we had to get as we had many engineers either hired out of Apple, or again, like from the indie scene, or from working on other apps in a very small team, or in kind of older school consumer electronics thought process. Shifted over to where the rest of Twitter's culture was at, which is lots of frequent releases on a multi releases per week, that kind of stuff. And so related to that is the idea that if you are experimenting and if you are using data to drive your process, well, it must be the same thing as just throwing spaghetti against a wall. You're letting the data just make all the decisions. All your design is just data. If you If you don't subscribe to the one end of the spectrum of the grand reveal, then you must just be throwing spaghetti at a wall and seeing what sticks. And so realizing, getting the culture shifted to realizing that no, these things go hand in hand, allowing us, having the ability to build a culture of measurement and experimentation lets us take more risks, bigger risks, confident that we can measure it and we can see, our amazing hypothesis that was done with our anthropologists and user research, that was done through intuition and great, creative process. Like, what is the 10, 15, 20% of that that's totally broken and did not survive first contact with users, and how quickly can we learn what's broken and then keep using that great intuition to refine that and figure out, like, debugging what is that problem that is preventing this from being its full awesome. So a helpful part of, like, how do we do that? What are we doing to change that culture? Is the Lean Startup movement's been really helpful. There's a bunch of different materials out there, so it's been useful to be able to get people shifted, realizing this is not a question of being more random. This is a question of being more scientific about how we're going about the mobile development process. So I want to shift gears a little bit and talk a little about how we, sort of the logistical issues around mobile development. In that, I talked about culture changes and culture hurdles, but sort of switching gears a little bit into the logistical problems that we've run into. And probably the single biggest logistical, sort of seed of root of all evil for where we ended up in the bad place that we ended up, that we had to dig ourselves out of, was the App Store. So this idea of, well, if there's going to be a 2-week review process, then we better make sure that we spend lots of time baking this software, examining it, testing it, making sure it's, like, totally perfect. And so we should have, like, a multi-week process of testing and looking at it. And if we're going to spend several weeks testing our software, we better make sure we, like, get enough features together to warrant that big test process, to warrant that big review process. And so basically, we evolved into this place where we have this long period where we're developing, and then this long period of testing and validating, and then evolving into this period of baking just to make sure we're, like, totally cool. And then we have, like, a period of measurement after we release, and maybe some hotfix action there just in case we missed anything. So this, for a while, we were at a multi-month or more, at least longer than a month, 6 weeks plus process to be able to get our releases out. And as folks have talked about, Kieran talked about, like, we were, like, give or take, like, it would often stretch a little longer as we're trying to squeeze one last thing in. So I'm going to come back to that in a little bit, but that's sort of the, I want to get that out there to frame sort of the next little piece to talk about, which is, like, how we scaled the engineering. And then I'll come back and talk about some of how this has impacted our process. So in doing that huge amount of development, we realized that, and in migrating into that place where we had these teams that are more complete, that have these permanent mobile engineers, we realized, like, we were missing a lot of the key parts of the puzzle, which is mobile engineers. And so our first thought about what to do about that was we would hire. So, like, we'll go out, pound the pavement, use our internal referral networks, and we'll hire. And so that's been awesome, and that was pretty key to do hiring. The challenge, especially on the Android front, is that we're looking for these, like, amazing, relatively rare people who have this mobile experience, at least relative to the rest of our hiring ability. So that's been really challenging, getting the recruiting pipeline up. I think that was it took us, like, sort of more of a bump than we expected to figure out how to get appropriately staffed. But a sort of a weird thing happened as we started getting more mobile engineers into the company, is that many of the places that we were putting them into, they didn't have, like, essentially, like, full-time mobile need. So we have, like, all these different feature teams that are innovating and doing all this really cool stuff. And so I gave the example of, like, the Comcast thing. But, like, the amount of hardcore mobile engineering that's required to do that feature on that team is not necessarily full-time, and not enough necessarily to keep mobile engineer like super like engaged. So we're like, and that's not always the case, obviously. Many features are like, they have multiple mobile engineers on them and are totally difficult, mobile challenging feature. But a bunch of stuff, making a small change to go along with a HTTP 2.0 stack thing on a reverse proxy and going into the mobile app and figuring out what to do on that side. Some of these things are really not huge full-time endeavors. So the approach we then realized we wanted to take was to train engineers inside of Twitter to become more mobile capable. And so that's what we did. We created Twitter University. We actually ended up buying a company to do that and retooled a lot of the way we think about training. A lot of our training was very, very focused on like Scala, as it should be. That's a challenging language that once you master becomes very, very efficient for both the engineers and the systems that are built on it. But we realized we needed to broaden that training into the mobile platforms. And so that has been really cool, very helpful. So we have had, I'm not sure where we're at now, but hundreds of people go through our internal trainings, and mostly engineers at first. And so becoming more Android capable, iOS capable. But the thing that was sort of the next hurdle and realization, kind of going back to my problem statement around culture, is that we realized we needed to train not just our mobile engineers, but we needed to train our project managers, our designers, and management in general. So we are early in this, but the early returns seem pretty good. But there's we're talking about classes like care and feeding of your mobile engineer, mobile sensitivity training, all kinds of good stuff. And it's very interesting as you have back-end folks and they're like, oh, cool, like we should just fix that. Like let's just patch all the versions of the client that are out there. We could just go patch them. Yeah. It's like, oh, that's so cute. That would be awesome. Would love to be able to patch all the versions of the client that are out there, but that's just not, like, so those are, without that knowledge, our key architects, without having that understanding of the increasingly mobile-dominated ecosystem or increasingly mobile-dominated user base, it's hard for them to make good decisions. So we realized we needed to train throughout the organization and transform it so that people were more cross-skilled, not just the teams, but the people themselves. So in the past year, I had actually Mohammed, who's somewhere in here, pulled stats for me of our code base. And in the past year, we've had something like a 10x or a 10x volume of committers. Basically, the number of committers in our mobile code base has increased tenfold, which is like kind of like terrifying and awesome at the same time. But we've only had like a 5x improvement or a 5x number of actually a patch throughput. So there's kind of two things going on here. One that's maybe half full, one half empty view of it. The one good thing about this is many of the engineers that we're training, they aren't contributing, or that are coming in and committing code, they're not doing massive, huge features. They're doing they're changing, some behavior around the way that our promoted tweet product works. So it may not be full-time work. The volume of their patches is going to be lower than some of our core mobile engineers. And the other thing that's happening, though, is we're realizing that we have mobile experts, and then we have many folks who are senior engineers but are junior to mobile. So their productivity is obviously not going to be at the same place as somebody who has a ton of experience on the Android platform or the iOS platform. And so we can do continuing education training, which is something that is ongoing, but we're realizing that a lot of how you gain experience besides time is in working with your peers and working with some of our more expert folks. So there's a lot of code review and pairing that happens around mobile, which is awesome and touching. And so, but again, here, sort of like one of these like fun things where like, yeah, this is a great idea, and then realizing later like, oh God, unintended consequences. But basically, thinking about it, we're like, well, we have a limited number of mobile experts, and we have a lot of teams that have maybe new, less experienced mobile engineers, but very, very experienced engineers in general. So cool. We'll use like code review as the way to get a lot of the mentoring to happen. So like we have a formal training program, but this will be the way that we get a lot of that experience spread around. And there were many challenges, many problems that we ran into with this. One is code reviews, I think, are great for socializing the code that's happening to make sure that there's not a single person who's a point of failure around that piece of code, or making sure that everybody on the team is aware of what's going on. Obviously, it's great for getting feedback around your algorithms, but it's a very late stage, harrowing place to do the mentoring and education. So we realized we were getting to this place where we're overwhelming our mobile experts throughout the company with code reviews, and often contextless code reviews. Like even just sort of like take your list of things you don't want to have happen in code reviews, and we're like doing them all. It's awesome. So not so fun, and I'm going to talk a little bit more in future slides about some of the technical things we did around that. But what we realized is we really just needed to get more expertise embedded into the teams, and we needed to switch into a model where it was sort of the other problem with this is that there's who's accountable for this code. So if you have a more junior engineer who's reporting to a manager who's not very mobile expert, is it the manager? The manager's like, well, I'm not a mobile expert, and that's why I have this mobile engineer on my team. So if the junior and experienced mobile engineer commits code that's not great, is it the reviewer's fault? The reviewer's the one who gave him feedback, but the reviewer's like, well, I've got like 10 other things going on, and I don't really have context for this this area of the code. So we realized we had created this system, which in the best case worked reasonably well for more senior folks or more experienced folks to give some of their expertise. But in the worst case, we created this system of no accountability around the mobile code, which is super frustrating. Although there was somebody accountable, which is the team and the manager releasing the app, but they're suddenly now accountable for like a whole company's worth of contributions. So like totally building the wrong biases into the system. So the answer for us was to move to an accountability-based system where the code getting into the code base responsibility was on those teams, on those managers, and then give them the tools that they need to be able to do that effectively, the resources. So I don't know, we got to a nice place through our through the process because we ended up with more senior folks in the org, but it's not been the most painless path. So I think thinking about this problem is if you're thinking about scaling your mobile teams or scaling development out to hundreds of engineers would be good. I don't think we really thought all the way through that. So another thing I want to touch on from a logistical problem perspective that we ran into in scaling mobile, and it's something that Kieran talked about in his talk, which is that we did one of those things in engineering that that we know is not a great idea, but it sounded awesome at the time, which is like, hey, like shipping the code and like our merge strategy, our branch strategy, like they look really similar. Like we have master and we'll ship master, so like cool. Like if you have code in master, it'll go out. Like that seems pretty reasonable. When we had a few number of people, that was great. That worked really great. The problem, as Kieran already talked about, as you scale up is, well, what if my code's not ready to go out? So I can't be in master. I can't be in trunk. I need to be in a branch. Oh, OK, that's cool. We have Git. We have great, a lot of folks with experience and great tooling around Git, so that's cool. We'll just be off in a branch for a while. And as more teams were doing more mobile code, and as they were figuring out which end is up around mobile code, we ended up with lots of branches. The best part then being when we get to the point where it's time to do a release, everybody's like, cool, let me race in. So then we have like lots of branches all coming in at the same time at the end, right before a release, which is like just like awesome, just not awesome. And so then that created sort of a negative feedback cycle around those testing periods and baking periods, and going, okay, well, God, as we have more people coming in and more teams coming in and more branches coming in, maybe we need to increase the cycles. And so that's sort of like, it works for a little while until you realize, like, you look at the future and just get like tired thinking about how this is going to continue to scale. And so we realized the place we want to be in is a place where we're doing continuous integration, where everybody is working on master, on trunk, and that shipping your code whether your code is shipped to a user and whether it's in master are decoupled. And so for that, we needed to build a feature switching system. So in 2009, I think there was a paper or an article by Flickr around a feature switching system they built for the web, and it was really cool and exciting. And many companies, including Twitter, built a pretty beefy feature switching system around our back end. But we had managed to go really long ways without having feature switching around client features. So little bit, sort of a subtle distinction. We thought, I think to some degree, well, we have this amazing, we call it decidering, but we have this amazing decidering feature switching system for the back end. That's cool. We've already kind of got ourselves covered. And in many cases, that's true. We could turn off behavior on a certain API endpoint, and then that would result in that data not going to the client, or a different, the particular format of data going to the client. But many of the features that we're doing in mobile, and a lot of the work that's being innovated on or iterated on, are not directly related to some back-end API endpoint. And so we realized we need to be able to control stuff that's happening in the client and variants of things from the server side, be able to tell the client that that needs to be dark. This is not ready yet. So that code's actually shipping, but it's just darked. And then we can roll it up and ramp it up, all that kind of good stuff. And so I guess some of the things in thinking about the feature switching is, and I think Jocelyn talked about this a little bit, but just the need to be able to slice and dice that along lots of different axes. So being able to say, OK, for this particular device, wait, sorry, no. For this device and this API level, this version of the OS, wait, sorry, this locale, this device, this API level. So being able to get that feature switching to happen in a way that was a little different than the back end. So having an extensive back-end decidering system, as Twitter does, doesn't really have to worry about turning features on and off on shipped software versions. It's really, there's one true version of the world, and that's Twitter.com. So on the mobile perspective, from the mobile perspective, knowing that we have to do this slicing up along a lot of different segmentation axes. So I wanted to give two examples, and mine are not cool, fun examples like Kieran's of places where, or was it Jocelyn's talk? I can't remember. It's all there. It's also similar that where all the things we're doing is running together. But two examples of places where it would have been awesome to have our feature switching system up, but we didn't, and so we had to hotfix around. So the first one is around photo filters. So we initially put out a software-based photo filtering solution, which was cool and got us into the market. But we realized that we wanted to go further and do a hardware accelerated using a GPU photo filter solution. And so we did that, and we shipped it. And I actually spent about 16 years in the game industry. I started at the Super Nintendo era and went up through PS3. And very reminiscent of the DirectX days, Android GPUs. It's like, taking me back in time to compatibility labs of all the craptastic DirectX drivers and cards. Same kind of problem on Android GPUs. So realizing that on this one particular Android GPU, we're hard crashing. And what are you going to do? And as it turns out, photo filtering is in the upload path. So having a hard crash on photo filtering on this particular device, not so awesome for anybody who's using that device that wants to upload photos. Basically means we're not able to get photos uploaded from that device. Would have been awesome if we could have just said, OK, well, we're going to dark photo filters for that particular device with the bad GPU. In our case, unfortunately, we're like, yay, hotfix. So not fun, lesson learned. Related, a similar thing, we realized we were having a problem, high number of crashes happening around right-to-left rendering. So right-to-left language rendering was crashing on the iPhone, and we're like, oh my god, that's what are we going to do? You can't just turn off right-to-left rendering. We just would be disabling Twitter for a whole segment of the population. But it turned out that was only manifesting itself in combination with type ahead. We had some weird UTF characters that were causing some problems around type ahead. How nice would it have been to dark type ahead just for right-to-left locales? Oh, and by the way, just for that particular version of the app. All the other versions of the app and future versions, it's totally cool, assuming we fix the bug. But it would have been great to feature switch off for just those things. So basically, that's sort of that was the straw that broke the camel's back around oh my god, we've got to get this rich switching thing that we have on the back end, we've got to get that stuff over to our mobile clients. The sort of thing that may also, or maybe like a little less obvious around the feature switching is, talked about it relative to decoupling the deployment strategy from the branching strategy, but it also led to this ability to beg for forgiveness instead of ask for permission. So we had spent so much time thinking about trying to prevent any bugs from going out. And in a lot of cases, that really impacts our agility to be able to deploy features. And so realizing that maybe there's some recourse other than just hot fixing for a bug getting out into the wild is tremendously liberating around thinking about how the software development process happens. So I'll go into a little more detail on that in just a minute, but I just wanted to point it out here. So another big lesson and thing that we learned around mobile development was we really initially were afraid, had some fear, I think, around or hey, this is a deployed native binary. It's not the same as the web. We can't do the experimentation. And about a year and a half ago or so, we realized, actually, that's not true. We can and should experiment on mobile. And so our CEO got in front of our company and said, hey, anybody can deploy anything to 1%. If it's child porn, we will come after you, probably legally, but within reason, we want to be able to be agile and work fast. So figuring out how to get that into our mobile pipeline and how to weave that through our feature switching system is something that is a big part of being able to scale development. We've gone through a couple different features where we otherwise would be completely blocking the whole company on doing something, and realizing that if we were to decouple that and make it an experiment, then that's something that the app can continue to ship. The trains can continue to run. We also use the train development model. So that's been a huge part. Similar related is I talked about it a little bit already, but just shifting into a culture of measurement so that we're measuring everything that is happening so that we have maximum visibility on what's going on with the app out in the field. So the challenge around all this then is that this stuff is increasing in pace. It has been increasing in pace over the last several months of how many teams are doing cool things on mobile and how many people, how many contributors we have, how much stuff wants to happen. And so a big challenge, it's been a big stress on our quality. And so one solution for that is cool, let's train people, let's get engineers to be better. Another thing is okay, well, let's double down on automation and testing, and there's been a lot of mention of that this morning. But we also realized that we just needed to go farther, and so that's what we, like Facebook, recently rolled out a beta program, so the Twitter beta. We have our nightly builds. We are using, again, this is right out of the Mozilla and Google Chrome playbook of open source development around trains and around stage deployment. But basically, our nightlies rolling into our public alphas, rolling into our betas. And so this is the kind of thing where we're able to get that real-time feedback way beyond what we could do inside of a device lab in the company, get to a broader pool. We have a lot of engineers and a lot of folks that use Android, but the reality is the pool of the percentage of Android devices that we have at the office, even with some of the new common or whatever, typical, I really like that vocabulary, but is much more limited than what is out in the wild. So getting that kind of feedback and letting people know, hey, come on in and see the latest stuff, but there's dragons this way. So just heads up if you come in and try the early release programs that we're getting something back from you. And so a big part of that for us has, oops, wrong direction. A big part of that for us has been using Crashlytics, which is a company that we bought and then made the product free for everybody. But basically, this gives us real-time actionable crash information. I love the story about the engineer who every day would look through the logs themselves like that. Fortunately, we didn't go through that, but I see that pain. And getting to, as LinkedIn did, getting to something which gives you more actionable automated stuff. Crashlytics has been critical for us in that regard, giving us performance metrics and crash crash information. So that means that we're not just having to count on test automation, but we can also know what's happening, what are our top crashers, how the devices in the wild are being affected. So what has this done to all these things I've been talking about, whether it's the beta program, all those kinds of things? They've taken this cycle that we have been using and allowed us to say, and going through the process of allowing us to say, I should say more accurately, hey, like maybe if we can put a lot of that user testing, black box testing into more automation, that cycle is continuous. So using Jenkins, we can run tests on commit and block stuff from coming in using Garrett, which is like a fabricator type thing for anybody who doesn't know Garrett, so that we're able to reduce our cycle. And then maybe if we use our beta program, instead of having to lean so heavily on our dog food pool and the baking process, then we can get that release cycle significantly down. So in the case of the beta program, we push that at least once a week. In some cases, we've pushed it on a daily basis when we have something super interesting to find out about. And that's been huge for our agility. So the last thing I just wanted to talk about briefly is we also have been working on Device Lab for user empathy, being able to see more devices. It's one of the things that's really kind of shocking is realizing that many of the people committing mobile code don't have the devices that the code is going to be run on. And you may be thinking I'm talking about the low-end phones, but I just mean even like I don't have an Android device. I'm an iOS user. So realizing that we needed to be able to get more access to more of our engineers to devices and make sure that our tests are running across a broader set of devices. That's ongoing work at Twitter, but I think that's a big, important part of continuing to accelerate as we go forward. So that is pretty much it for me. So happy to take any questions. Two questions. Right up here. He's got a mic coming to you.
How do you do the beta release for iOS?
Yeah, we don't. So, but I think I'm very interested in talking more with Apple about that. And I mean, one option would be that we put out a special app, and we don't even call it Twitter, but TechCrunch calls it Twitter. But that it's a separate app for doing beta. But really, right now, I don't think there's not a lot of options, which is really unfortunate. So if anybody's from Apple in the crowd, that's what we need.
So we're all drinking the same Kool-Aid. What are we missing? I mean, why is development all of a sudden every one of these has been the same way, where it's more automation, release train, shorter release cycles. What are we missing overall?
I think maybe I'll answer that in two parts. What have we been missing, and maybe what are we still missing? So I think what we have been missing is events like this, where if we were able to talk to each other more about our challenges. It sounds like I gave a talk a couple weeks ago or a couple days ago, and afterwards I had folks from Zynga and LinkedIn and Facebook and whatever, and we were all like, oh my God, it's all the same, like these challenges, and we've all been doing it independently. So being able to get together, thanks, big props to Facebook for giving the opportunity for us all to chat together. I think that's been a big part of what we've been missing. We're sort of going it alone on this. And I think the thing that we're missing going forward, I mean, I don't know about all the different companies, but I think one thing that we're moving more and more into on the Twitter side is thinking about our mobile app as a much more dynamic thing. So the first transition was going, no, it's not dynamic. This isn't the web. It's shipped software. You got to change your mindset. And now I think what we're trying to do is not overcorrect and say, no, wait. We really need it to be dynamic software. And so I think some of the things Kieran talked about, some of those techniques, we've been applying, trying to think about more of those. So I think that's sort of like for us, a lot of the sort of future is continuing to accelerate. For many of you are probably the same way. Certainly at Twitter, we're very a lot of what we're thinking about is learning, and how can we learn as fast as possible, and how do we balance that with our stability and all the other stuff that we want to do. But really what we need to figure out is how to get ourselves to be as fast as possible, as agile as possible around learning. Time for one more? One more, okay.
Hi.
Last question.
Looks like Scala's worked out very well for you at Twitter. Just curious, do you think at some point in the future you might go over to Google Go?
Sorry, has Scout worked out well, and we might, Scala, sorry, I was like Scout. What's Scout? Would we move to Go? So at Twitter, you actually can use pretty much whatever you want within reason for backend services. So we do have a variety of different languages. I think Scala has worked out super well for us, and being in a functional programming style has worked out for us. Definitely Go is something that more services are starting to use at Twitter. We have a lot of investment in the tooling around Scala, so I wouldn't imagine that that'll go totally away. But yeah, we're always on the lookout for being smart.
All
anyway,
right.
Thanks a lot, guys. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Jeremy.